Hello, hello, interwebs. It is us, Nicholas and Devin. We are back. I am Devin Hunter. This guy over, well, I guess over here is Nicholas Pearson. Nicholas, how are you doing today, buddy?
A lot better. Last time we did this, I was
Yeah.
getting over one sickness and into another, but I'm feeling more alive, more human, more productive, which as a Capricorn, that is a measure of a lot of things in my life. So it feels
hmm
good to be able to work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally understand that. I would last week, I turned the book in on Monday and then of course got like an email back Tuesday saying, oh, there's a couple of things. So then I had to fix the couple of things. And it was stupid things. It was like I copy and pasted the wrong bibliography.
Mm.
I have like a running file of like, this is what I'm working with, this is what I tagged or whatever. And
I think we might have lost Devin.
am I here? Okay. This
Okay, I
happened
see it.
on Sunday. I'm here. So I don't know what's going on. I will say StreamYard is being weird, and I have like I'm on a good machine, so I don't know what's up. But on Sunday we had an issue with a class live stream. So just in case something happens, we will jump back on and we'll go live again. But we have things to talk about. But last week was a really intense week, and I kind of I felt weird by like, I turned the book in on Monday, do edits on Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, I was sitting around just feeling like I should be doing stuff, but my body and my mind were like, no, you need to relax. And I had this whole moment. And then Ben Stimson had posted something and we were talking back and forth. And he was like, oh, you've had a very productive week. And I'm like, have I? And he's like, you turned a book in. Oh, crap, I did. So got to give myself a little more credit, I think, than maybe I do sometimes. But all that being said, it was a week of wanting to do more, but also full moon and like things were up, right? So it was just a whole bag. But I'm back. I'm feeling good. I did take the weekend pretty much off, and I just spent the time like knitting and playing with plants, which was fantastic. Holiday. What did you do over the holiday weekend?
I worked.
Mm,
Kind of normal for me. I had the day job, and I got a good amount of writing done. I'm at a stage where like I really want to talk about the project that I've had in the works for a while, because now I actually have progress to back up my claims. Like it's really going
right.
to happen because there's no other option. It's really going to happen.
hmm
By end of day tomorrow, I should have the first chapter done. I know that's a like dangerous thing to put into the ethers when it hasn't happened yet, but honestly, I will probably finish it today, or at least get 95% of that first chapter done. And then I've laid the groundwork on all the subsequent chapters, and I gotta fill in some data. I gotta have the citations and the historical information and all the quotes kind of lined up. But once I have those in order for each chapter, I kind of just plug them into the running outline I've got for each one, and then it comes together real quick. So I'm
Yeah.
real excited. I can't say a lot about the project as a whole, but it is certainly a lot witchier than my other crystal books. And
hmm
um, I know I was just telling you offline a little bit about what like the subject matter is I'm writing, like the very paragraph I'm writing right now. I
hmm
pause just to jump on here, and I'm really excited that I get to do this in chapter one, because then we get to go so much farther over the
Right.
chapters. I won't give away how many there are just yet, but it's going to be a fun project, and I
Yeah.
get to tell some cool stories about some overlooked things in the crystal world. And
hmm
um, yeah, I think I'm really going to have fun fleshing out the rest of it and turning it in.
Yeah. I'm excited for this project because as somebody who, you know, considers himself a serious occultist, it is one of those things that sounds like it's going to provide a lot of missing pieces for people who are like oopy spooky traditional witchy people, right? And it's also because it's going to give them information that they probably don't know because of the world and aesthetic and things like that they come from. And there's information that you stumble along in your research, because I know I did the same for me, and I didn't do the type of research that you've done in your life. But you stumble upon information that like, oh, this is really kind of dark and cool in this way that my other audience probably isn't going to be down for, but I'm going to mental note this. And so I'm sure you've got, over the years, you probably have collected a lot of very interesting little tidbits about stones and especially how they might relate to magic and things like that. So I'm excited to see what happens with this. I think it's going to be neat.
I am really excited about it. A big part of the process of writing this book for me is re-enchanting the world of stone. It's really easy to be enchanted.
Where'd he go? He's there. We're having all kinds of problems today with StreamYard. What is going on with StreamYard?
I think I'm back.
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah,
StreamYard's being weird. I don't know what's going on with StreamYard. We're going to try to get through it today. But yeah,
we'll make it work.
We'll make it work.
But yeah, bottom line is it's not a secret that I've fallen in love with just kind of like ordinary rock. But it's getting other people to see the magic in that, both metaphorically and quite literally, that is going to make writing this particular book so much fun.
Yeah. I'm excited about it. These going to be neat. I have one book. I have another book that I'm working on that I have to have the first rough draft done in like 3 weeks. And so this week is basically that. Like I have realized I need a routine. I was teaching a class on Sunday and we were talking about daily practice and things like that. And I always whenever I teach a class series, I always do the material with the students because why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? And so I was like, well, what's my project going to be? What's my thing going to be? And I realized as I was talking about something completely different, that I wanted to do for the class project, I realized, no, actually, I probably need something a little different. I probably need some stability and some routine and to put that back in, because I definitely over winter fell out of all of my good habits. Like I can definitely look back and I'm like, oh, like my gut health isn't as good as it was before, winter started. And my I've done a lot of cleaning and rearranging. Obviously my office is really shifted, and blah 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 blah, but it's just been a lot of shift and a lot of changes, and not necessarily for the better. So I'm going to try to grab the reins and reorient things. But I've realized that when I have a pretty consistent schedule, not only from a production standpoint am I way more productive in general, but it does seem to allow me to sink into creating more of a consistent vibration with certain things and bringing that consistent vibration into my life. So one of those things is with my crystal practice, I would have grids set up everywhere in my office, and I would go and work with a different grid every day and, things like that. I haven't been doing that for a couple months. So, everything's here. There's just the grids are all dissected and taken apart and things like that. So I realized oh, I kind of miss it. I kind of miss that whole thing. So la-di-da-di-da. All that to say, there is a lot going on. We are very busy boys, but we are so happy to be here and to talk about crystal misconceptions, because this is something that instead of going through last season, we did episodes about different types of stones, and we'll keep doing stuff like that, especially if you ever request people, just send it on in. But we also are going to dance around with some other topics in the crystal world. So I thought this would be a fun thing to talk about, because there are a whole boatload of misconceptions, especially from people who are buying crystals and selling crystals. There's a lot of misinformation that gets traded back and forth in that world. And sometimes you can't always help it, right? You get a book, I remember as a crystal seller, when we had the shop, we had 14 different reference books that were behind the counter that people could grab and look stuff up, when they were helping a customer or whatever. And what we'd really find is that at some point they became very different views and outlooks on what crystals were and what they could do for you. And so it's, if you're a crystal book person, or if you're somebody who is just collecting stones, period, you're going to end up with a lot of differing information about what things can be, depending on who the author was and what they were into, and it's all blah, blah. So I want to talk to you about crystal misconceptions today and dive into this idea that maybe maybe something kind of took on a life of its own and has turned into an urban legend or some sort or whatever when it comes to crystals. So I'm going to hand it to you with this. What is, well, because there's a couple of them we're going to talk about today. What is like the most common? We'll start there. So what are the most common misconceptions that you hear when people are talking about crystals and asking you questions about crystals?
I mean, there are so many, but I think one of the most important to kind of bring right out the gate is to lean into things that relate to personal health and safety. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about what constitutes toxicity and what requires special handling. All crystals require safe handling, but safe handling can be as simple as do not grind this up and inhale it or ingest it or place it in any part of your body, which is also pretty normal handling. We generally don't consume very many rocks in our lives, with the exception of the mineral halite when it is specially processed to be table salt. So, but probably the most pervasive myth that I hear relates to nomenclature, where it's something that I've spoken about pretty extensively in the past. Is minerals whose names end in ITE are not safe for water. They're either soluble or they're toxic, and that's a really pervasive myth. And it could not be any further from the truth, because that ITE ending is a contracted form of LITE or light, which comes from the Greek lithos, and it means stone. So all that ITE ending tells us is that it's a rock or a mineral. It connotes nothing about solubility or safety. So just earlier today, I got a message about uh, uh, questions about toxicity regarding malachite. Not specifically because of its nomenclature, but because a frequent attendee of one of my classes had read online that it should only be used by advanced crystal practitioners because it was so toxic. And I mean, in truth, malachite poses some pretty severe health hazards when you are performing lapidary work, when you are polishing and grinding it, and there are fine particles that are airborne. Inhaling those tiny little bits of malachite dust are it's deadly over time. And on the flip side of that, when we go back to this nomenclature-based myth, there are a lot of minerals whose names do not end in "ite" that are really not safe
Oh,
for
yeah.
water or not safe for regular handling. I mean, we're talking about stuff like galena. We
Mm-hmm.
could, come up with a bunch of other examples of things, orpiment, realgar, that do not contain any form of that "ite" or light ending,
Yeah.
that do require some specialized care.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when we look at chemistry, it's even not as good as saying, hey, this contains aluminum and aluminum can be hazardous to human health, because we have to contextualize it further. Something like
Mm-hmm.
corundum, which is the mineral name for both ruby and sapphire, depending on color and trace elements. They are aluminum oxides, or alumina in its trigonal form, but it is completely stable. It is not soluble at normal temperatures and pressures. You're not going to be able to put it in your drinking water and extract any aluminum out and poison yourself that way.
Right.
We really have to look at deeper things than just its name and a list of its ingredients. We have to look at how those ingredients come together from a chemical and crystallographic level. And
Mm-hmm.
if that's not at your level, always exercise too much caution rather than
Yeah.
not enough. But can you imagine the fear that someone has been given because someone on the internet told them, "Oh, you can't have malachite in your house; it's going to poison you." And
Mm-hmm.
exaggerating a little bit, but I do see that sentiment out there, and it's not a helpful one. Human In human history, malachite has been mined and worked by human hands for about 9,000 years, if memory serves.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, people have died from malachite poisoning in those 9,000 years, but not from wearing it as jewelry, not
Mm-hmm.
from carrying it around with them, uh, not from using, PPE while polishing it. It's only
Right.
in extreme circumstances. Quartz, another mineral that is extremely hazardous to our health when
Right.
it is powdered and airborne.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no fear that your average piece of quartz is going to poison you unless you are grinding it up and inhaling it, and then it's causing a condition called silicosis. So
Mhm.
yeah, these myths around the "ite" ending in a name connoting solubility or toxicity, or that even just having a toxic thing, a potentially toxic thing in its chemical formula is dangerous, because we have to know about bioavailability. We have to know about its interaction with water and acids and all kinds of other stuff. So
Yeah.
that's like the biggest soapbox I will die on when it comes to crystal myths and misconceptions.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that there's like this basic understanding of just life chemistry that like we all should have. And no one's expecting you to get a freaking chemistry degree. I was an okay chemistry student in high school. Like, I mean, let's just be real. But there's just like basic stuff that people should know, like that water is a solvent. Like it's simple, it's silly, but it's this idea that like, okay, if you put anything in water, it is going to start to break up, and that is what water does. Like we owe water so much when it comes to life and all of that good stuff, but water is actually very, very corrosive, and it is a very unique substance kind of in the universe, so when we have this idea of like working with stones and putting them in water, and the reason why we go through all of this caution stuff is really just this idea that, well, water is going to create a reaction on anything it touches, no matter what it is. And it may be a very mild repulsive kind of a thing, but it could also be absorbing and then ultimately breaking things down, releasing trace minerals and elements and blah 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 into the water, and that could change the stone, that can change the water, that could be dangerous for you. Like it's just a basic science thing of like, okay, you should know that water is a solvent. You should also know that water is still water, and it's not like it's going to turn your thing into an instant poisonous, toxic, blah blah blah. There's a lot of jumping of the like shark, I think, with people, where they take a very little thing and they take a very basic science thing that they probably don't quite understand, and they put the two together, and then poof, we get malachite is toxic. And it is, right? Like you said, like you can get malachite poisoning. But I remember going to, like, one of my first crystal teachers was like, oh, if you're pregnant, you should never handle malachite. It can cause you to miscarry and all. And she was really serious. And I was like, really? Like, I wasn't aware. Like, that's kind of insane. Like, it can absorb through the skin that quickly. And like, I went through this whole thing. And she just, yeah, that was like her whole. So like we for a long time in my crystal practice, that was like, I just assumed that was what it was. And it wasn't until I went flipping rocks over, so to speak, and asking questions that I realized, oh, okay, that's not actually true. And that's a fascinating thing to me. So there does tend to be this pseudoscience, or maybe kind of mildly understood science, that comes into play here. What are some of those things when it comes to like, oh, people just don't understand that A plus B doesn't necessarily equal C, and things like that when it comes to just the simple science of it?
Yeah, here's one I got yesterday, and it was like maddening, because when trying to explain the context of something, the question asker didn't want to accept any new data. So the misconception was presented as real gemstones do not get warm when you touch them, and this person was like flabbergasted because this piece of obsidian they bought was warm to the touch. So, we try to like back up and describe what's really going on here. And what's happening is the helpful claim in its proper context is that the perceived ambient temperature of a stone can be a helpful telltale sign when comparing it to certain materials. But it's not true for all things. So, for example, a piece of quartz, a piece of glass, and a piece of resin on the same shelf, the quartz is probably going to feel the coolest of those three materials. But it's a comparative thing. We can attribute that experience that we have, which is a relative one, and not necessarily an absolute one. We can attribute it to things like the specific thermal properties of that material. But unless we're doing some very complicated math, we're not going to find that of any great value to us in the grand scheme. And so I tried to explain that you have a dark colored material here in the form of obsidian. And if it's in a sunny shelf, it's going to warm up. If you have any dark colored object and leave it in a place where it will receive infrared, a variety of electromagnetic energy,
Mhm.
it's going to absorb that. It's going to absorb that. It'll retain it as well as it can, given the materiality of that. But we can't make a blanket statement that all gemstones behave the same way, because some are actually excellent thermal conductors. Diamonds, for example, great thermal conductors. Quartz, less so. But it always has to be contextualized. And at the end of the day, this person didn't get what they wanted because they were unwilling to accept new information. And it's that idea where we have to contextualize everything. And if we're specifically comparing quartz to glass, it's a narrow margin for which one is likely to feel cooler, and it's likely, not guaranteed. And then quartz to resin, a much wider differential can be experienced between those two, but it's still not an absolute thing, because if I put a piece of quartz in the oven, it is going to heat up.
Yeah.
If I put a piece of shungite on a sunny spot in my garden, it's going to get like red hot to my fingers, especially when it's like the B grade stuff and other really metallic looking stuff, because it's going to reflect less light. And that's but like part of this equation. So that is a misconception that I just encountered that had been blown out of proportion, that really just frustrated the heck out of me, because I couldn't help this person, because they had it in their mind. They read on the internet, real gems never get warm. And that's not true. We couldn't heat treat things to improve their color if heat didn't affect them. So,
well, but also, like in the case of like obsidian, heat plays a big role in its formation, just to begin with. Like, so just that idea, like for just, right out the get-go is a very confused, to me, that's like that adds like laws of science that are just confusing and unrealistic. That's fascinating to me. I know that there's a whole thing about like sound, and this has been and me, and just like, well, you are a sound person too. So the idea of sound and resonance and those things are fascinating to me. Of course, when it comes to the crystal world, that's fascinating to me. And I remember selling, what are they called? Angel chime moldavites in the store. And they made a ting and it resonated and it was very fascinating. And then I, like maybe a year or two later, I was at a crystal fair and I was listening to this guy talk about how real gemstones will create sound when they tink, a high pitched tone, and fake ones are going to have a dull tone. And I had this whole moment of like, that's not how shit works at all. Like, where are you getting those from? And the only thing I can think of is that it's because you do have some examples of really beautiful, high pitched resonant tones that can come out of crystals, certain crystals, if they're, kind of screwed with a certain way, and if they're shaped a certain way, and things like that. There's got to be a lot going on with that, but it isn't necessarily like a across the board real gemstones resonate sound and others don't. Like, that's a weird thing. Have you heard that before?
I've heard variations on that, and I think the way that was adopted by the larger crystal market is largely from like some, we'll say, frequently effective but not always effective tests for things like jade bangles.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
High quality jade, when polished into that, thin band shape, when struck with the right material in the right place, is more than likely going to produce a really ringing sound. Supposing there aren't any fractures that we can't see with the naked eye that are going to interrupt that, and a handful of other things. Whereas some of the lookalikes, resin and a few other stones, are less likely to produce that ringing sound. But we can't apply that logic universally to all stones. I have exquisite pieces of natural quartz that, when struck with another stone, ring like a chime. I mean, like, really ring. They're also jumbo sized. I have little tiny pieces of quartz that, if I carefully clink them together, make a gentle chime-like sound. But then I have lots of natural minerals that, because of the way they're shaped and the kind of materials they're made from, won't do that. And so sound is not an effective test. Sound is helpful sometimes under specific conditions, with specific materials. But again, it's that game of comparison. We need it. We need to understand that these are contextualized relationally to other materials, specific ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we lose a lot of this when it comes to myths and misconceptions, because we live in a memeified world. We live in a world where people want one sentence that they can take at absolute face value and not have to learn the if-then statements behind it.
Yeah. And it's I was reading something the other day. I'm going to get on my old man box for just a second, but I was reading something the other day about I think Jason Miller posted it, about the idea of like reading comprehension, and how you should be able to read something and comprehend the audience. And basically, if it applies to you, if it doesn't apply to you, what might be lacking in that. And this is all stuff that I feel like yeah, like we were taught that, and it's weird to be functioning from a place sometimes where not everybody's doing that. And then you get this memification of the universe thing that happened, and it's so easy to fall into these little traps. And I think one of the things, I know I've talked to a lot of different spiritual authors about this the last 6 to 9 months, of just the reality that there's so much bullshit that exists now because of the memification of everything, that most of the work is just kind of going through and showing people how to discern through these, all of this misinformation and the overwhelming kind of cloud of information that's out there. And some of it's repeatable, and some of it's just like weird stuff, and some of it is people's gnosis that was presented as fact. And that's kind of how it all starts. Don't get me wrong. Like it's how it all begins, is gnosis that turns into a tradition, essentially, or a school of thought. But that got a little rough with the memification stuff. And now that we're kind of on the other end of it, like I don't see the overwhelming amount of memes, for crystals and stuff coming through my feeds anymore like I used to. Like I don't see the quartz and then like the 4 words, that are supposed to be for quartz. I don't see that kind of stuff anymore. But I do. Oh, you do?
It's alive and well.
Oh,
your feed has been tailored to your needs.
Thank you.
And celebrate that.
Yeah, thank you, algorithm. Yeah. Okay.
But no, it's still alive and well. It has accelerated rather than the opposite.
No.
And it's really just about who you interact with.
Oh gosh.
So,
okay.
And I want to play devil's advocate, Capricorn classic.
Yeah, please do. Let's do it.
Those are entryways, and we need to celebrate every entryway that is accessible to folks. But if we don't also teach the critical thinking skills that go with that, if we don't encourage people to have direct experience, so that way they can cultivate and accumulate their own gnosis, that's not useful in the long term. If they learn this reductive view that I have to put this specific red stone on my root chakra or I can't balance my chakras, then you
got all kinds of other problems, friend.
Right? Exactly.
Like, yeah. It's hard. It's such a tricky thing, because we really are in this place of like, I think more than anything, we need to just, as far as like the scene goes, is really just promoting the ability to discern better, and not to shame people for taking information and assuming it was factual. I mean, that's gotten all of us in trouble, at least especially in this country, the last couple of years. But even more so when we think about the impact that kind of thing has on our spiritual practices and the things that we involve in our spiritual practices, for me, that's like, it puts extra weight on it. If you're a spiritual person, you really care about this stuff, you're not trying to be an idiot. You're trying to do things the right way. You don't want to be disrespectful of something, or you don't want to accidentally misuse something and then have it, kind of have an inverse reaction, all of this stuff. I understand there's a lot of nervousness that people get, so they want to do things the right way. I remember, when we had the shop, people would come in, they wanted the book. Well, what is the book? The book, the one book that has the thing. Well, there isn't just one book. And teaching people that are explaining that is really difficult, because we're just taught the otherwise. We're given fact, we absorb that because we're humans and we like easy facts. We like easy information that we don't have to go rooting really hard for. Basically, that's just, our brains are hardwired for it. So when you get information that is easy to get, easy to access, easy to absorb, it's fantastic. Unfortunately, there comes, with all things on the internet, the algorithm is tailored towards the fantastical. It's tailored towards the outrageous. So you do get, like, what I remember the most, and you're right, my feed is totally tailored, especially after writing a plant book and just being Mr. Plant Guy for like 2 years. It's been kind of fantastic. I think for that, because I don't get a lot of the crazy crystal stuff. But what I would get is just the fantastical, over the top stuff. Like I think Caitlin had mentioned a pure arsenic and sulfur and bumblebee jasper. And just bumblebee jasper was like the stone for everyone to freak out about for about 3 years. And it was just everywhere. Don't touch it. Don't. Da, 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 da. And we were like, no. And I remember when we had the shop, I got into it with my employees over this, because we brought really beautiful bumblebee jasper pieces in. They were polished and gorgeous, and I have them here in my house now because they wouldn't sell, because my employees would like hide them behind things because they were afraid to sell them because they were toxic. And I'm like, no, like if you get raw stuff and you want to lick it, yeah, we have a problem. But like, this is not that. Like, this is not the experience that you think it is. And yeah, sure, I would tell people don't make like a water elixir or something out of it. But the flip side of it is, like, these are good pieces that are gorgeous pieces that are okay to work with, right? Like, it was an interesting thing. So bumblebee jasper is one of those things. And I know you've heard all kinds of stuff about bumblebee jasper.
Yeah, and
Oh, sorry, that was my bad. I hit the wrong button.
it's not jasper, so we should probably call it what it is, which is travertine. It is a carbonate rock that is mostly made out of calcite and aragonite, two fairly inert minerals. And the colors that we see come from sulfide minerals. So not even like native sulfur, which could be toxic, but sulfides in a relatively more stable state. Not the most stable, but we have iron sulfide producing a lot of those black streaks that we see. We know that better is the mineral pyrite. And also arsenic sulfides in the form of orpiment and realgar, which are more bioavailable than native arsenic. If in a hypothetical world, nobody is ever going to do this, of course, but in a hypothetical universe where you had pure arsenic, nothing, just its chemical formula is AS, arsenic, that would pass through the body without interacting much because it's not in a bioavailable state. Now, arsenic salts, extremely reactive to our bodies. Arsenic sulfides, less reactive than the salts, but can be turned into them by the processes inside us. So, the bioavailability is not super high. It is stabilized by the presence of those carbonate minerals, not rendered inert, but rendered more stable. And so then we have to start to think about, well, what can we do that affects the carbonates that are gluing the whole thing together? Add acid, because then we break apart the carbonate base. We neutralize the acid, and we yield some carbon dioxide, and it frees up all that other stuff. So, wearing a lot of bumblebee jasper against the skin while perspiring lots, probably not a great idea. Mm-hmm. Is it statistically likely that you're going to get, arsenic sulfides to pass the skin barrier? No. But I would still caution people against it, if for no other reason than you're probably going to damage the beauty of that stone and ruin its finish by sweating on it. And I would actually say that about all carbonate-based things, and not just bumblebee jasper. So it's that critical thinking piece. It ties back into our understanding of like basic chemistry, which I know is not everyone's strong suit. It's not what people are called to do. But I really do encourage people, if they want to learn about crystals, learn a little bit of chemistry. And it can be by osmosis. You don't have to go on a chemistry course, but don't believe everything you read in a crystal book, especially when it comes to mineral science. Believe mineral science from mineral science books.
Right. Well, and too, like, I know, like, from my perspective, there's things that, like, okay, so like selenite's one of these great examples, because I know I've tagged you in on this conversation several times throughout the years. But so selenite's one of those stones that it is like, we know not to put it in the dishwasher. Like, I had somebody buy a selenite bowl and then put it in the dishwasher, and then they opened the dishwasher and it wasn't there anymore. It was there were just the remaining chunks of what was left afterwards. And I've been at festivals, and I've had like people put selenite in their goddess pocket and then sweat all day and then end up with a big rash and their stones breaking apart and, all of that stuff. And so the general rule of thumb is just don't get selenite wet. Don't interact with it in that way. Try to keep it dry. And, we don't want to use it in elixirs and that kind of fun stuff. The reason for this isn't that it's going to kill you or any of those other things. It's just a really fragile stone. So going through and explaining this every single time is really difficult. So what a lot of authors are going to do is just going to give you a little thing, don't do this, and then they're going to move on because there's 500 other stones to talk about, right? Or whatever. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times people assume there's something really dangerous about that stone when no, it's just, it's not ideal for this purpose. And that stuff isn't necessarily always going to be explained. And so I know just from conversations I've had with people about my writing, going into that and being like, well, no, like that wasn't, I didn't say that. I never said that this was the thing. I just didn't go into this other shit because we've got 40 pages or whatever that we've got to cover, So there's just, it's something that people really do just need to have some critical thinking skills with. They need to be able to look at something and say, oh, okay, more than anything, my number one rule is I always get a second source. I never just look at one source and take it for what it is and run with it. I always look up something else that is going to be either corresponding or correlating with it. Just to double check my facts, just to double check things, right? And then the other thing that I've learned too, when it came to like colloidal silver, this is a fun thing to talk about with people. Very dangerous thing if it's not worked with the right way. If you try to make it, it can be a very dangerous process. But I met this woman who had been making it since the 70s. And she had the little setup and she showed me how to do it. And it was fascinating. I will never try this myself probably, but it was very fascinating. And she was very, very educated and knew what she was doing. She wasn't part of a big corporation and she was producing this stuff. And it was something that I was told, oh, it's toxic and it's evil and it's all don't, blah, blah, blah. But she was making it and she was using it for very practical things that was very helpful for certain people. And it seemed to have an effect. So like that stuff is fascinating. It's one of these things that you have to make the judgment call for yourself, but don't necessarily assume anything is necessarily exactly the way it's presented especially in a meme. I think that's my big thing is just check your memes and check for yourself. Another thing too is you might have a sensitivity to something that other people don't. And that's something that I talked to, I won't name the author, but I did talk to an author about this. And she was like, oh no, in my books, I just, either I don't talk about it, like I don't talk about the stone, or I don't necessarily have a positive relationship with it. So she doesn't know how to write about it in a certain way, so we're all coming at it from different angles, folks. And so you really do want to get a second opinion. Now, I will say, Nicholas, I like the way you write your books. I like the way that you present all of this sort of information for people, because it's like, here are the facts. Here's the stuff. This is what you can do with it. This is what I do with it or have done with it. And then you just kind of move on. Like you don't hyper exaggerate the scary things, but you don't gloss over them as if they're nothing either. You really do give people that power and that control. And I like that, I will say.
I really endeavor, thank you, first and foremost, but I really endeavor to teach the reason why behind stuff. So like in Crystal Basics, the big one from 2020 with 200 stones, in the chapter on elixirs, there's a little box on page 2 of that chapter. So you can open it up and it's right there. And it's, I think, labeled Crystal Cautions. And it doesn't give you a discrete list of stones to avoid. Instead, what it says is, hey, it's probably a good idea not to put rocks that contain these kinds of toxic things or heavy metals. It's also probably a good idea to avoid things that are below this hardness. It's also a good idea to avoid things that you can't identify properly or attach to a matrix or are friable or soluble. And then I give some examples, but it's really like, here is the feature, here is the physical or chemical or structural reason that we want to avoid some crystals. And then I feel better at night going to bed knowing that I've said you need to avoid something that is overly friable. I didn't list every possible mineral that is friable, because you can get a piece of tourmaline that is and a piece of tourmaline that isn't. You can get a piece of selenite that is and a piece of selenite that isn't. And rather than saying such and such species can never go in your water, when in fact 90% of the time such and such species is probably inert in water at normal
Yeah.
temperatures and pressures.
Yeah.
It's just reminding people that nature is not black and white.
Hmm.
And so we have to start looking at the context. It's going to be
Yeah.
our vocab word,
Context. Yeah.
context.
Context. This episode is brought to you by the letter C. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you 100%. I don't sell crystals like I used to, obviously, anymore, and that's so I don't have to deal with the stuff in the same way. But there would be a lot of people coming in with that were just horrified that they were going to kill themselves or accidentally or something, and just having to be like, no, that's not a problem, you're going to be okay. But also, again, it all boils down to just having a basic understanding of like, hey, this is just kind of regular chemistry. Like, you should know what water is, you should know, not to, that certain things are going to create a bad reaction, right? Like, related but not related, like you don't want to mix ammonia and bleach. Like, that's kind of one of those common things that we should know, but people don't seem to know, and I don't understand why. And it's that kind of a thing. So you can literally just go, and I know a lot of people aren't going to do this. This is something that like Devin does, and I know you probably do this kind of crap. But I regularly go on YouTube and I look for like educational documentaries, and there's a lot of like teachers, especially science teachers, who do recordings of their classes, and they just put them up online. And so, like for me, I am pretty like at least once a week, I'm watching a class that was recorded at a university or at a high school or whatever, that is something I don't know about, or it's something that has changed in the last 20 years since I was in high school or whatever, right? And being in that place of seeking out information and seeking out things that are filling in the gaps versus just kind of going off of what I assume has been life changing. So I highly recommend to everybody, like if you get a chance to do something like great courses, go sign up for great courses. Watch all those college lectures. It's awesome. Like, especially if you're a pagan person, like you are going to get history lessons like you are never going to find in the books that we read. We're never going to find, like, in perspective on what was going on historically, that you're never going to find. I found out crystal information by reading or by watching a whole Roman civilization documentary series thingy on that. Like, you can do stuff like this, and it's just so enriching for your life, and it affects everything, because it's showing you, and it not only just, hey, things have been done differently in the past, or things can be done differently, but it's showing you that you can put pieces together in a different way to create or to get a different result, right? Or to get a different understanding of something. And that's really important, because again, critical thinking, right? And the best way to empower our critical thinking skills is to gain knowledge and then apply that to our critical thinking skills. All right, that was my old man box on that.
One of my ways I do that is I buy textbooks, and
Yes.
I don't necessarily read them cover to cover, but I find an essay that's meaningful and relevant to what I'm doing. And I get that, like, that's also not something everyone can do because they're expensive. I
Yes.
can't do this every week. I don't even do it every month. But when I find something like really related to a niche that I'm focused on, I go find someone who's not woo at all and is thinking about rocks in a way that overlaps with what we do in the magical, metaphysical, spiritual sectors. And there are some incredible emergent fields in things like archaeogemology. Now, if you told teenaged Nicholas that in the future it would be a field of study, my life would look super different right now. I would have chosen very different kind of undergrad, which might have hopefully led me to grad school. You've got things like geopharmaceuticals and medical geology. You've got people in the history of medicine that are focusing on the topic that an academic by the name of Nicola E. Harris, she coined lapidary medicine, and that's an interdisciplinary field that I'm super fascinated by. And there's geomythology, and there are also popular books written about some of these topics, and there are also popular science books that are written by academics that are just fantastic reads. One of the ones that's been on my nightstand forever, and I'm using for research for the book I'm writing, is called Unearthing the Underworld, and it's by Ken McNamara, who is just so much fun to read. I own all of his books because he's a compelling writer, and it's just super fun. And I've never been like a sedimentary rock specialist, but he is. So his Unearthing the Underworld is a book almost entirely about sedimentary rocks.
Fascinating.
And the stories are so good.
Yeah.
There's talk about like flint and chalk and fossils
I want to
and
read this.
banded iron formations, and how like the strata in those banded iron formations we find worldwide reflects changes in the Earth's atmosphere, and how we can like decode geological time through
Here
looking
for it.
at the patterns in rocks. And
Here
he
for
you
it.
know, there's jargon in there, but he writes for people like us, not
Mm-hmm.
for people who have the same degrees as him.
Yeah.
So like those are also really great resources if we're not all going to rush out and buy a $200 textbook. We can find that, you know, $20 or $25 pop science book that's still written for us. And, you know,
Yeah.
especially one thing I will tell every crystal lover that they need is at least one field guide to rocks and minerals.
Yes.
I don't care which one you get. Um,
Yes.
if you have one that is in print, it will be out of date.
Yeah.
It might not be out of date right now if it's a newly published work, but it will
Give it a
eventually.
year. Yeah.
Because, you know, science grows, we get better analyses and better interpretation of the data. But, you know, don't treat it as uh, you know, something biblical that has no errors in it. Treat it as a snapshot in time. This reflected
Mm-hmm.
hopefully the best scholarship when it was written. But I also collect field guides to rocks and minerals, just kind of generally. There are also some great ones about gemstones. And then I also, like, if I'm going to go visit a place or spend some time
Mm-hmm.
there, I look for local field guides.
I was gonna say, that's like, start with your local, like and it's so silly because you grow up, or you know, you're in an area and you see the shale, or you see the limestone all the time, and you take it for granted. But like, go look at your regional, go, and everybody has one. Like all regions have some sort of mineralogical book that you can get. And like, I was surprised that there is so much like, I moved out here. I knew that we've got Shasta to the north of us and things like that, but I had no idea that like where I live, the ground is riddled with obsidian, like just riddled with it, because we're in a big volcanic alley. There's an inactive volcano behind me called Mount Diablo. Like we just riddled with beautiful obsidians and coal. So like, we've got a lot of this stuff everywhere, and I, as a magical person, can connect to that obsidian and have a very unique regional relationship in a way that other people aren't going to have, right? And so start with your local stuff. When I moved from Ohio here, everything changed. Like there aren't as many fossils and things that you find. Like, whereas where I grew up, you couldn't flip a rock over without seeing a trilobite, or without seeing some sort of critter from, you know, Paleolithic times or whatever the fuck. So it's just this idea of like, learn what your regional stuff is, learn what is available to you naturally. You don't have to go spend a bunch of money. You were just writing about this. Like, you don't need to go spend a bunch of money to get into crystals. You just got to go find out what's there, right, and start working with it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, get into your go find a regional data book. I was just at Barnes and Noble and they had one for our area. So
yeah, I've got like half a dozen on Florida's geology, and they're all written for lay people. None of them are science books, because those are resources that I can like recommend to people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a science textbook isn't always going to be like my first choice to recommend, because I want things that are written in ordinary speak that you don't already need a degree to understand. But it's funny you mentioned California's obsidian. I was just looking over a paper in an anthology called Myth and Geology.
Oh.
And there is an essay in there by Fox Hodgson called Obsidian, Sacred Glass from the California Sky.
Yeah.
So when I finish it, I'll tell you all about it.
Yes, please do. I would love that. Another thing too, if you are interested in doing college level research, like let's say you do want to get a textbook on stones and you would like to jump down that road. One of the things that a lot of college, what I learned in college, when I just did my my dive into accounting a couple of years ago. So I went back to school for accounting. But when I was there, it was different from when I had gone to college when I was a young person. Everything has changed. Books have changed, like all of it's changed. And what I have found is that you can, you can go on like eBay and you can find used textbooks from somebody who spent the $300 for the textbook because they had to, and now they just want to get rid of it for 25, $50. And that is shocking, but it's totally there. And if there's a college course that you like, you can find out what the reading list is. You can find out what the textbook is, and then you can just go get your stuff that way. I have, yes, because I kept all of my stuff from almost all of my textbooks from when I was in college, like all of my psychology books, all that, and all that has come in handy immensely. Like as I've been writing books, I can reference college textbooks, which is fantastic, right? And so I won't let go of those things. Like those are precious little babies. But over the years, I know I've found them in used bookstores and online. Like you can get it if you want to get that kind of stuff. You can find it, especially on the eBay. So, and there's websites that specifically focus on college books and recirculating them because they are expensive, and it's a shame that so many of us have to go buy a textbook and use it once and we'll never touch it again, kind of a thing. So go reuse, recycle, repurpose, go do the things. You can find it. So like and that's something that I think a lot of people just assume because, oh, I'm not in college, I can't get this. No, you can. You absolutely can. Don't let that stop you from getting the information you want to get. Just period. Okay. So we probably need to start wrapping things up here. So one thing that I want to ask you is, if there was one like way to move forward, right? We've talked about discernment and things like that, but to help keep ourselves from falling into crystal misconceptions, what advice would you give of people who are paying attention, who are watching or listening right now?
So I don't know if I have like a singular soundbite here, but I have a rough checklist of things that we can use to get that discernment, hopefully, when we encounter some, we'll say, interesting claims being made, whether they're about crystals or other things. First and foremost, what is the intention of this claim? Like, what purpose does it serve and for whom? And if it's not relevant to you, you can just move on and ignore it. If you're like me and can't let it go even when it's not relevant for you, we also want to look not just at intention, but also like what effect does it have? Because that is not always the same as something's intention. You can have great intentions and still hurt someone's feelings if you just say the wrong thing at the wrong time, or the right thing at the wrong time, or the wrong thing at the right time. There's so many ways that can happen. And then when we see things that border on the scientific, they feel science-like, they are science-ish without being scientific, it's always a good idea to have a resource that you can refer back to and just verify. And my favorite resource for this is actually free, and it's online, and it's Mindat, MINDAT.org. It's short for mineral database. If you just think Mindat mineral database, it's easy to find. And you're going to find so many great bits of information on it. There are often locality lists with an interactive map. Those are things that, are often not set in stone, no pun intended, I promise, that you can use to find out, hey, someone is saying that such and such mineral is found only in this one place on Earth. Let's go see if that's true. Sometimes it is, and then other times you come up with something like sugilite, which you've been told only comes from, one place in the Republic of South Africa, and then you go, oh,
Actually,
found here, here, and here. Or shungite can only be found in Karelia, Russia, and then you're like, wow, it's found in like 6 different countries on Earth so far and counting. So it's amazing what that can do for you to eliminate some misinformation. And then also just like a really grounded non-woo approach for understanding the materiality of stone. I want everyone to feel empowered to have all the mystical experiences that they want. But chances are, if you are experiencing something in relation to the physical makeup of a rock, you see a change in color, or a change in texture, or whatever else it is, the reason that might be happening is probably mundane and material. If you see something strange happening with the optics of something, see if it's repeatable. See if you can do it with another example of the same thing from the same place. And if you don't have access to the same thing from the same place, suspend judgment for a moment until you can investigate farther. But there's a saying that a lot of geologists will use, and it is that the best geologist is the one who has seen the most rocks. It's not the one with the best degree from the best institution. It's not the one with the most accreditations. It's not the one with the fanciest lab equipment. Because I will tell you, there are folks in the geoscience field whose know-how is entirely from like carefully prepared slides and textbooks and, you know, their basic hands-on labs, and have never had the chance to go into the field and just go, oh, so this strata of shale is between these two other things. And we can tell that because blank. And, you know, we can count down the layers and understand thanks to Milankovitch cycles, changes in like the precession of the pole and all kinds of stuff. That this tells us it's about so many, you know, hundreds of thousands of years old. There are people who can go do that. And then there are other people whose perspective is entirely theoretical. There's nothing wrong with just the theoretical, but we can take a clue from them and say, hey, the best crystal healer, the best crystal mystic is the person who's probably not gotten the biggest library and read the most books and taken the most courses, but the one who's gotten to experience the most rocks. So question why and for whom claims are made, back up anything that sounds like science, and then also just go touch a lot of rocks.
Yeah. Go touch a lot of rocks. Go play. That's everything and more than I was going to say. So that's fantastic. Okay, everybody. Well, we'll be back in about a fortnight. So 2 weeks, and we'll have another episode. We are going to be diving into more crystal goodness. In the meantime, you can go to your website is
theluminouspearl.com.
theluminouspearl.com or modernwitch.com. You can find links to all the good things and resources. And, you know, honestly, we're here to be a resource for you. So feel free to send your questions in, things like that. We are more than happy to dive into those. All right, everybody, we will see you in, well, like I said, a fortnight, and we'll be back then.